Okay, everyone. I'm going to try to stay there most of the time so that the recordings sound better from there. But I don't know why they put the light switch. Well, I guess it makes sense. I want it here. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about KV. I think we know a good amount about KV already. What can you see from this image up here? Well, we see that we have lower energy indicated by longer wavelengths. I really like this picture. This one is stronger, and then in the remnant beam, you can see more is getting through. And that's pretty much the lecture. Right? It's one of our major control parameters. It used to have an effect on contrast, not so much anymore. It used to be KV up, contrast down. And if there's a question that really points to KV as a factor of contrast, and it's forcing you to say whether contrast goes up or down, then you can still go with KV up, contrast down. Right? When you use an excessive amount of KV and you get a lot of scatter, it'll give you a grayer image and lower the contrast. It's known as the potential difference. It's that push. Actually, in the lab, someone asked me a good question. When the MA in time is set, right? The time governs essentially how long the MA continues to be applied for, like how long the filament continues to stay on. But it also means the KV stays on. Because the question was, what happens with the KV? The KV also stays on, right, for the duration of the exposure. Because what good would it be if you continued to create electrons thermionically, but they just sat there and weren't pushed over because the KV stopped kicking in? It also, as you've learned already, will affect your intensity. So when you increase KV, not only do you get more electrons, you also get more photons. Well, that's not true. I take that back. You get more photons, not more electrons. Did you realize the mistake I made, besides me? So mass, when you go up in mass, let's just take a second. When you go up in mass, you'll get more electrons, right, which will end up giving you more photons. When you go up in KV, you will get more photons because you will have more interactions in the tungsten/molybdenum target, the anode. So going up in KV will not only increase intensity, the amount of photons you get, but it'll also increase what they sometimes refer to as the quality of the beam. So where MAS is a quality factor only, KV is both a quality and quantity factor. I think I said that backwards too. I'm doing well today. I might have to edit the video. Let's say that again. Mass is a quantity factor. KV is a quantity and quality factor. Okay, now I'm good. All right, KV is really thousands of volts, right? So it is AC. I haven't seen it yet. Maybe some of you have, but I'm really looking forward to watching the Tesla Edison movie that just came out. I forget what it's called, something like, I don't know, conduction battle or current battle, something like Current Wars, I think it's called. But AC means it's alternating current, and it has a one lobe going up, one lobe going down. So we look at current, and we often draw this diagram here, which is called a sine wave. Okay, I think we can keep going. So what's the rule on KV? We have to penetrate the part. If we use less than penetration, we get quantum model, not enough information to reconstruct, and that shows up as noise. If we use too much, that's not good either, right? We'll have what's known as saturation. We'll get an overly, potentially really dark image or potentially light. So if something calls for 65 kV, we'll get noise if we use 40, and bad things will also happen if we use 100. I mean, don't quote me on that exact number. 99 or 90 might not be so good either. I don't know what the percentage is exactly. So here are some images. They're made, they're film images, but this is a key statement here. No amount of radiation can compensate for insufficient kV penetration. So if you set, we did this in the lab a long time ago. If you set 40, 45 kV for a pelvis, it doesn't matter how high your MA and your time, how high your mass is, right? If they're not penetrating, then it's just going to add to the dose of the patient. And your exposure indicator, which is only indirectly telling you the dose to the patient because it's only measuring the amount of radiation that the plate received, can be totally off, because if it all gets stuck in you and there's very little in the remnant beam and the plate doesn't feel anything, then it's going to make it sound like you didn't use enough. Meanwhile, the patient could have been really overdosed. Higher kV, we said, will give you a longer scale. And that's usually because higher kV gives you more scatter. And when Compton scatter comes out, it's coming out at different angles. Think of that as misinformation being provided to the computer. The computer likes data that's more pure. When the X-rays go straight through in the remnant beam and there's less divergence of the beam, especially if you center correctly, then you have better information to provide the computer to do its analysis. Scatter, which you'll have more of, is diverging and coming out of the body at weird angles. It's not going to have the same type of absorption that you have with regular X-rays that kind of just go straight through. And that's going to throw off the image and turn up as noise. Okay. Minimum kV. So I'll say it again. This is the minimum kV. So you can go higher than this, but not too much higher. Right? Maybe 8 to 10 kV higher. Right? Doesn't mean something that's 54 should be done at 120. And didn't we just say this? No amount of mass, no amount of intensity will make up for not enough kV. I think we've drilled that into your heads at this point. And it works the other way around too, right? If you have the adequate kV, but not enough intensity, right? So you only have a few worthy photons, that's not going to be enough. 15% rule. So the relationship between kV and exposure is exponential. What does exponential mean? For now, I just want you to think it means a lot. It means a small change gives you a big result. So when you compare it to mass, you have to double the mass to double the intensity. kV, you don't have to double the kV to double the intensity. You only have to go up by 15% to double the intensity. And the reason why I put this here is because I want you to know, and there will be a test question like this, that you can apply this rule multiple times. Right? So I'm not saying this is the question, but if we're in the lab and I look at something and the image needs to be adjusted, and I say you need to double, I think, your technique, then you can go up to 15%. If I say double isn't even going to do it, I think you need to quadruple your mass. Well, instead of actually quadrupling your mass, you could go up in kV 15% and then 15% again. You can do it twice. Does that make sense? Okay. Increasing mass is much worse for patient exposure than an increase in kV. Well, think about it this way. One thing we can say is when you increase kV, you'll have less photoelectric effect and more penetration of the part, meaning more escape of photons that don't get stuck in you. So increasing kV is a good thing, right? Increasing mass is only going to give you more photons. So the same percentage of photons that get stuck in you with one mass will be the same ratio that gets stuck in you if you increase that mass. You'll just have more. So 50% in kVp will raise the dose about 20 to 40%. Do not get confused. Dose goes up 20 to 40%. Intensity goes up 100%. So you get twice as many photons, but you're not giving as much dose as if that same twice as many photons was created by doubling your mass. It'll sound good on the recording. Yes? Yes? Okay. Stunned by the quiz? Wasn't that bad. I'm probably going to take that question off, the one that had a double. So it doesn't matter whether you split the difference, use one way, add another. I'm just thinking both, you get 8 points, whatever. No? Don't do that?
See how many people got it right first.
Do it. Just do it. Give everybody a point. Yeah, do it.
I think it'll work in your benefit.
Do it.
Okay, optimal kV. So the optimal kV in film had what's known as a very low latitude. You had to use a very specific kV, and you couldn't be much higher, maybe like 2 or 4 kV, more or less. Now the latitude, the margin of error, the wiggle room, however you want to say it, is much larger, where you can use probably, you see how this one is dark here? And this one looks pretty good, but it's a little dark. And this one might be the optimal image, in my opinion. When you do this digitally, 60 and 70 will also look good, right? So you can now, in a way, get away with not being as accurate with your KV. We're going to have a lab one day. I'm going to break open the chemistry and make sure it'll all working. And half the lab, you'll probably be stuck on just trying to get the first image to look good. Yeah, you guys don't know how spoiled you are now. So, provided you have enough to penetrate, you can go up. What's the actual definition? Optimal kV can be defined as that which is well above. I crossed that because I don't know what the book means by that exactly. How about just a little bit above? How does one know that the kV is really good? Technique charts, which we'll talk about next semester, I think, should be created, and I think is a law in New York, that you have to have a technique chart for every room. So the physicists and other people need to get together, need to look at those exposure indicators, and need to figure out what the optimal kV is. And that's basically what you should follow. Certainly you need to be above the minimum required. How much is the minimum? Again, you don't know, because that can depend on the room, and of course depend on the part, right? The minimum for pediatric abdomen is going to be a lot less than the minimum for my abdomen. And, you know, different for some football dudes' abdomen, right? So minimum is based on the part. And scatter is both an issue and not as much of an issue anymore in digital radiography. So what I mean is it still an issue? Yes, because the detectors and the plates are very sensitive now. So it is still an issue. Is it also less of an issue? Yes, it's also less of an issue because the digital technology in terms of reconstructing the image is also good at fixing the noise created. So you have sensitive cassettes and image receptors, but you also have processing that's able to deal with it. So I think we should still play things on the safe side and not leave cassettes in the rooms, or bring in 5 cassettes and then place them right on the table, and then right next to that be doing a hand or a wrist or whatever it might be. Even back in film days, scatter was not so bad. Here's an image. We have A at 64, B at 94. Is it a little bit more grayed out over here? Yeah, but it's not that terrible. And if this were to have been done digitally, you probably could have manipulated it and turned B into A. So scatter is not as much of an issue, but remember, if you're forcing the computer to try to clean up something, it's going to give you an overall worse image than if you had given it better data to begin with. So you don't want to use a very, very high KD, even if you think you're saving a little bit of dose, which may be true, right? Because we said increase KD, and the dose will go down. However, you don't want the dose to go down in such a way that the image is undiagnostic either, right? That kind of, there has to be a balance there. And yeah, here's another example, right, where they used the 15% rule. So they increased KV. Of course, now we can't see it. They increased KV from 80 to 92, and they cut the mass in half, went from 40 to 1/2 of that, so obviously 20. And they both look pretty good. So 15% rule, and if you read the white paper, they talk a lot about 15% rule. It's a rule that goes back to lots of film world environment, but it also seems to work in the digital environment as well. So 15% rule is not a holdover. It's something we've continuously used regardless of how we're processing things. And yeah, that pretty much does it for us. I did that with 2 minutes to spare.